Marcus Webb stared at the security monitor, his coffee gone cold in a trembling hand. 2 in the morning. 30 years as a head ranger in the Sundarbans mangroves, and nothing had prepared him for what limped out of the darkness that cold Thursday night. A white shape emerged slowly, massive, moving wrong. He leaned closer to the screen, breath catching. The creature dragged something behind it, something small, something lifeless. As it entered the floodlight's reach, Marcus's blood turned to ice. A white Bengal tiger, limping, bleeding, and that scar on the right shoulder. "Oh God, it's you." The tiger stopped at the electric fence, those amber eyes finding the camera, finding him. Then it did the impossible. It roared, not in rage, in desperation. Behind it, the small shape stirred weakly. A cub, dying. The tiger I nearly killed 8 years ago had come to me for help. Before we continue, please leave a like and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. Marcus Webb had spent 30 years in the Sundarbans Wildlife Sanctuary, but the title of head ranger felt heavier with each passing season. At 55, his weathered face and gray-streaked beard told the story of decades in the unforgiving mangrove wilderness. His hands bore scars from countless encounters with nature's sharp edges, thorns, claws, barbed wire, and his own mistakes. He lived alone now. Helen had been gone 2 years, taken by breast cancer that spread faster than any wildfire he'd ever fought. The ranger station had become both his refuge and his prison, a place where he could hide from the silence of their empty home in town. But one mistake haunted him more than his wife's death. 8 years ago, he'd participated in a conservation program that seemed noble at the time, tranquilizing tigers to attach GPS tracking devices. The young white tiger he'd shot that day had been magnificent, rare, a genetic miracle in these mangroves. The tracker was supposed to help protect the species. Instead, it had nearly killed him. The device malfunctioned, caused a severe infection. Marcus could still remember the screaming from wildlife officials, the emergency surgery, the touch-and-go recovery. He'd stopped using tranquilizers that day, a decision that had nearly cost him his career. His son didn't make things easier. David Morrison. Dave insisted on using his mother's maiden name professionally, had joined the Ranger Service 6 months ago. At 28, Dave represented everything Marcus had tried to avoid: bureaucracy, scientific detachment, pragmatic solutions that treated wildlife like inventory to be managed rather than lives to be respected. They barely spoke beyond professional necessity. Dave blamed his father for Helen's loneliness, for choosing animals over family, for breaking his mother's heart through benign neglect. Marcus had no defense. The accusations were true. The veterinary team was led by Dr. Sarah Chen, 48, a Vietnamese American who'd grown up in Houston before dedicating her life to wildlife medicine. She'd been the one to save that white tiger 8 years ago, working through the night to cut away infected tissue and nurse the magnificent creature back to health. Sarah had forgiven Marcus for his mistake. Marcus had never forgiven himself. The white tiger had a name among the locals: Arjun, after a legendary warrior. He'd become a ghost in these mangroves, spotted rarely, attacking never. His mate, Nalini, was equally elusive. Together they'd raised multiple litters in the deep wilderness. Until 3 weeks ago, when their youngest cub, Kiran, had stepped into something terrible. 4 days before that Thursday night, deep in the Sundarbans mangrove territory where humans rarely ventured, Arjun returned from a successful hunt to find his world shattered. Kiran, his youngest cub at 8 months old, lay motionless beside a termite mound. The right side of the cub's face had swollen to twice its normal size, a grotesque mass that oozed fluid and reeked of decay. Nalini paced frantically around their small clearing, making distressed sounds that echoed through the mangroves. The other 2 cubs huddled together beneath a fallen log, instinctively staying away from their sick sibling. Arjun approached slowly, his massive white form ghost-like in the dappled moonlight filtering through the canopy. He lowered his head and sniffed the wound. The scent hit him immediately: metal and rot, the same smell that had once nearly killed him. His shoulder bore the scar from that human device, the memory of fever and pain still vivid in whatever way tigers remember trauma. But he also remembered something else: the cool den where humans had cut away the sickness. the strange bitter water they'd made him drink, the slow return of strength. Arjun made his decision. He gently grasped Kiran by the scruff, the way he'd carried the cub as a newborn. Nalini blocked his path, growling low. She didn't trust humans, had never encountered them with anything but fear. But Arjun pushed past her, his eyes meeting hers with something that transcended instinct. Their cub was dying. This was the only chance. The journey began at dawn on Monday. The Sundarbans formed a labyrinth of islands separated by tidal channels, mudflats that shifted with each moon, and waterways prowled by saltwater crocodiles. Arjun had to navigate this treacherous maze while carrying a cub that grew weaker by the hour. His own body betrayed him an old wound on his right front paw, long healed, cracked open under the constant strain. By the end of the first day, infection had begun to spread. On the second day, Arjun waded through chest-deep water, holding Kiran's limp body above the murky surface. A massive crocodile surfaced nearby, its prehistoric eyes evaluating the struggling tiger. Arjun released a guttural roar that sent birds exploding from the trees. The crocodile submerged and disappeared. That night, Arjun managed to catch a small fish, which he pushed toward Kiran with his nose. The cub couldn't eat, couldn't even open his mouth. Arjun ate nothing himself. The third day brought disaster. Tidal surges from a distant storm system flooded the low-lying paths Arjun had been following. He was forced into open water, swimming 2 kilometers through channels where the current threatened to sweep them both out to sea. Kiran, delirious with fever, struggled weakly in his father's jaws. Arjun's own fever had begun the paw infection spreading into his bloodstream, turning each movement into agony. On a small mud bank, with water rising around them and darkness falling, Arjun collapsed. His breathing came in ragged gasps. The infected paw had swollen grotesquely, and he could no longer put weight on it. For the first time in the journey, he considered stopping, considered letting nature take its course, as it had taken countless other creatures in this unforgiving wilderness. Then Kiran made a sound barely a mew, more like a whisper of breath. The cub was still alive, still fighting. Arjun rose on 3 legs and continued. The 4th day was a nightmare of endurance. Arjun could no longer carry Kiran for more than a few minutes at a time. Instead, he used his nose to push the cub forward, inch by painful inch. They reached the edge of human territory by late afternoon farmland carved from the forest edge. Villagers spotted the white tiger and panicked, running for their guns. Arjun had no strength to fight, only enough to circle wide, avoiding confrontation. As darkness fell on Thursday, he saw the lights of the ranger station glowing in the distance. Marcus was alone on night shift when the motion sensors triggered at 2 in the morning. He switched to the live camera feed, expecting a wild boar or perhaps a leopard. Instead, he saw a white shape moving slowly toward the perimeter fence. He grabbed his rifle, protocol required it, and moved to the observation window. The spotlight revealed everything. Arjun, the white tiger from 8 years ago, collapsed 20 meters from the electric fence. Beside him lay a dying cub, its face grotesquely swollen. Arjun lifted his head with obvious effort, and his amber eyes found Marcus through the window. Then he roared, not in aggression or warning, but in something Marcus had never heard from a wild animal before: desperation, pleading. Marcus's hands shook so badly he dropped the rifle. He stared at the distinctive scar on Arjun's right shoulder, the mark of his own terrible mistake. "Oh my God," he whispered. "It's you." Every protocol demanded he call for backup, use tranquilizers, maintain safe distance, but protocols hadn't walked 4 days through hell to save a dying child. Marcus grabbed the control pole and opened the emergency medical supply gate, a small reinforced door designed for sliding food or equipment into the secured animal pens. He extended the pole and slid the gate open from a safe distance. Arjun used what must have been his last reserves of strength to push Kiran forward with his nose. The cub slid through the opening into the secured medical pen. Then Arjun collapsed completely, unconscious, on the outside of the fence. Marcus's hands fumbled for the radio. "Sarah, get here now. We have 2 critical patients." His voice cracked. "And you're not going to believe who one of them is." Sarah Chen arrived 40 minutes later, her emergency medical kit already in hand as she jumped from her truck. Dave pulled up seconds behind her, called in early by his father's cryptic message. The three of them stood in the pre-dawn darkness outside the medical pen, staring at the small tiger cub lying motionless on the sterile floor. "Sweet Jesus," Sarah breathed, pulling on latex gloves. "How long has he been like this?" "I don't know," Marcus said, "but look at the father." They turned to where Arjun lay outside the fence, his white coat stained with mud and blood, even unconscious. His breathing was labored, each exhale accompanied by a rattling wheeze. Sarah entered the medical pen carefully, approaching Kieran with the practiced caution of someone who'd been bitten before. The cub didn't move as she began her examination. What she found made her stomach turn. "Marcus, I need better light. And get me the surgical clippers." Under the harsh fluorescent examination lamp, Sarah carefully shaved away the fur around the swelling. What emerged made Dave step back, his hand over his mouth. Embedded deep in the cub's jawbone was a rusted steel jaw trap, its serrated edges crusted with dried blood and tissue. "This has been here for weeks," Sarah said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "The infection has spread into the bone. I can see necrosis all the way to the mandible joint." "Can you save him?" Marcus asked. "Maybe, but I'll need to remove a significant portion of the lower jaw, 30%, possibly more, depending on how far the infection has spread." She looked up at Marcus. "Even if he survives the surgery, he may never be able to hunt properly again." Dave's voice cut through the tension. "Then what's the point? You're condemning him to starvation in the wild or a lifetime in captivity." "The point," Marcus said quietly, "is that his father walked 4 days through hell to give him a chance. We owe them both that much. This is exactly why these animals need to be in controlled environments," Dave said, his frustration boiling over. "In a zoo, this never would have happened." "In a zoo? He wouldn't be free," Marcus shot back. "He's 8 months old, Dad. He doesn't know the difference between freedom and safety. But his father does." Sarah interrupted before the argument could escalate. "While you two debate philosophy, I need to examine the adult." She grabbed her remote camera equipment, a pole-mounted unit that would let her inspect Arjun without getting dangerously close. The footage revealed a horror Marcus hadn't fully grasped in the darkness. Arjun's right front paw was completely destroyed. The pad had split open, exposing bone that had fractured under constant pressure. Infection tracked up the leg in angry red lines, spreading toward the shoulder joint. "Sepsis," Sarah said flatly. "Advanced. He's been walking on this for days, maybe a week." She turned to Marcus, her expression grave. "That tiger is dying. Even with aggressive treatment, I'd give him 50-50 odds." The three of them stood in silence, the weight of the decision pressing down like the humid pre-dawn air. Dave was the first to speak. "We can only save one. Kieran needs a 6-hour surgery minimum. By the time you finish, the infection in the adult will be too advanced." "So we choose," Sarah said. "The cub who has his whole life ahead, or the father who sacrificed everything to save him?" Marcus closed his eyes, and suddenly he was back in a different medical room 2 years ago. Helen lay in the hospital bed, her body ravaged by cancer, and the oncologist was giving them options: aggressive treatment with terrible side effects and low success rates, or palliative care to ease her final weeks. Helen had chosen to fight. She'd endured the pain, the sickness, the slow deterioration, because she wasn't ready to leave. She'd wanted every possible hour, even if those hours hurt. Marcus opened his eyes. "We operate on both. Kieran first because he's most critical. Then Arjun." "Dad, that's insane. Sarah will be operating for 10 hours straight. Minimum." Sarah was already calculating. "I'll need a second surgeon for the adult. Someone experienced with major amputations." "Dr. Ramon Gutierrez," Marcus said immediately. He's at the regional hospital, 80 kilometers from here. I'll call him, Sarah said. But Marcus, I need you in the operating room when we work on Arjun. I'm not a surgeon. No, but you're the only one that Tiger might tolerate being conscious near his cub. I'll need you visible during the procedure. Otherwise, if he wakes up confused and afraid... She didn't finish the sentence. They all understood what a panicked, wounded tiger could do. Dave stared at his father. You're betting both their lives on a 10-hour surgical marathon. No, Marcus said. I'm betting on the same thing Arjun did when he started walking. That some things are worth fighting for, no matter the odds. As Sarah began making calls and Dave grudgingly started preparing the surgical suite, Marcus walked outside to where Arjun lay. The tiger's eyes were open now, just slightly, tracking Marcus's movement. Marcus sat down on the ground, a safe distance from the fence. I know you remember me, he said quietly. I'm the one who hurt you. I don't know if you understand what we're trying to do, but we're going to save your son, and then we're going to save you. Arjun's amber eyes held Marcus's gaze for a long moment. Then, with visible effort, the tiger turned his head slightly toward the medical pen where Kiran lay, and kept it there. He was watching, waiting to know if his son would survive. Marcus pulled out his radio. Sarah, how long until we're ready? 30 minutes for sterilization. Then we begin. Then let's not waste any more time. Dr. Ramon Gutierrez arrived just as the first hints of dawn touched the eastern sky. The 60-year-old surgeon had driven through the night, his salt and pepper hair still disheveled from being woken at 3 in the morning. He surveyed the surgical suite with a practiced eye, nodded once at Sarah, and began scrubbing in without a word. Kiran was already sedated and intubated when they wheeled him into position. Sarah stood at the head of the table, her hands steady despite the tremor of exhaustion that would come later. Marcus watched from the observation room, his coffee growing cold as the first incision was made. The extraction of the trap took 2 agonizing hours. The rusted steel had fused with bone tissue, creating a twisted mass that required delicate separation. Each piece Sarah removed went into a sterile container, evidence of cruelty that would be needed later. The metal fragments told their own story. This was a professional poaching trap, illegal in every district, designed to hold animals until traffickers could arrive. By hour 3, Sarah had exposed the full extent of the damage. The mandible was shattered along a 4-centimeter section, fragments of bone embedded in surrounding tissue like shrapnel. She exchanged a glance with Ramon through the observation window. The decision was clear. They had to remove 30% of Kiran's lower right jaw. The resection took another 2 hours. Sarah worked with microscopic precision, preserving every nerve bundle and blood vessel she could salvage. The cub would live, but his face would be permanently asymmetrical, his bite forever weakened. Whether he could survive in the wild remained an open question. Hour 5 brought complications. The infection had spread to Kiran's throat, causing inflammation that threatened his airway. Ramon inserted a temporary feeding tube while Sarah drained the abscess cavity. Over 200 milliliters of pus evacuated a massive amount for an animal Kiran's size. The stench filled the operating room despite the ventilation. He hasn't been able to swallow properly for days, Ramon observed, his voice muffled by his surgical mask. How did he survive this long? His father kept him alive, Marcus said from the observation room, speaking into the intercom. Somehow. By hour 6, Sarah was suturing the final layers. Titanium pins stabilized what remained of the mandible. The feeding tube would stay in place for at least 3 weeks. Antibiotics flowed through an IV line. Kiran was stable, but the next 72 hours would determine if he'd truly survive. They moved the unconscious cub to a recovery cage, his small chest rising and falling with mechanical regularity. Sarah allowed herself exactly 30 minutes to rest. She sat in the break room, her hands trembling as she held a cup of tea Marcus brought her. "One down," she said. "You sure about the second?" Marcus looked through the window toward where Arjun still lay outside the fence, his eyes fixed on the building where his son had disappeared. The tiger hadn't moved in 7 hours. He's waiting, Marcus said quietly. He won't rest until he knows. Sarah stood, draining the tea. Then let's not make him wait any longer. Arjun's surgery presented unique challenges. Full anesthesia was impossible. Sarah's assessment indicated the tiger's survival instinct wouldn't allow complete unconsciousness in unfamiliar territory. Instead, they opted for heavy sedation combined with local anesthetic blocks. It meant Arjun would be partially aware throughout the procedure. It also meant Marcus had to be in the room. They moved Arjun into the large animal surgical bay using a hydraulic lift, keeping him secured but visible to the observation area where Karan's cage had been positioned, even sedated. Arjun's eyes tracked Marcus's every movement. The examination confirmed Sarah's worst fears. The paw wasn't just infected, the bones had shattered under days of bearing weight they were never meant to carry. Infection tracked up the foreleg in dark, necrotic lines, reaching toward the shoulder joint. Amputation wasn't just necessary, it was the only option. The choice was brutal: amputate at the paw, leaving a small stump with high reinfection risk, or take the entire foreleg at mid-length, ensuring clean margins but leaving Arjun as a three-legged tiger. Sarah chose the latter. Marcus signed the authorization form with a hand that shook so badly he could barely read his own signature. The amputation began at hour 9. Ramon made the first incision while Sarah monitored Arjun's vitals. The sedation kept the tiger calm but not unaware. At critical moments, when bone saw met femur, Arjun's eyes would focus with sudden intensity, and a low rumble would emanate from his chest. Each time, the surgical team froze, and each time, Marcus would step into Arjun's line of sight and speak. "Your son is alive. He's fighting. Just like you." The rumbling would stop. The surgery would continue. By hour 10, they'd remove the destroyed foreleg and close the wound with layers of sutures that would need to hold against the immense stress of a 400-pound predator's movement. A blood transfusion began, precious tiger blood from the sanctuary's limited emergency reserves. IV antibiotics joined the feeding fluids. Hour 11 saw the final sutures placed. Arjun was moved to a large recovery cage adjacent to Kiran's, separated by steel bars but close enough to see and smell each other. As the sedation lightened, Arjun's eyes opened. He saw his son in the neighboring cage, breathing steadily. Then, with effort that made everyone in the observation room hold their breath, Arjun dragged himself across the floor until he reached the bars separating them. He extended his remaining front paw through the gap, reaching toward Kiran. The cub was still unconscious, but Arjun lay there, paw outstretched, keeping vigil. Marcus watched the monitor from the observation room, silent tears tracking down his weathered face. 3 days later, on Sunday afternoon, Marcus received a call that shattered the fragile peace. The village council had convened an emergency meeting, and his presence was required. The community center was packed when Marcus and Dave arrived. Thomas Whitfield, a 62-year-old farmer whose weathered face spoke of decades fighting the land, stood at the front. He'd lost 3 goats to tigers the previous year, not to Arjun, but the distinction didn't matter to his bank account. "We need to talk about the white tiger," Thomas began without preamble. Maria Santos, a 45-year-old teacher and amateur environmentalist, stood immediately. "If this is about killing him, I'm walking out now." "Nobody said anything about killing," Thomas replied, though his tone suggested he wasn't ruling it out. "But we need to face facts. That tiger is crippled now. He can't hunt, and his mate is still out there, hunting closer to our farms because she's feeding their remaining cubs alone." Jake Patterson, a 38-year-old hunting guide with arms covered in tattoos, leaned forward. "Thomas is right. We've seen her twice this week near the goat pens. She's getting desperate." Marcus stood. "Arjun is recovering. Once he's stable, then what?" Thomas interrupted. "You going to release a 3-legged tiger back into the wild? That's a death sentence. He'll starve, or he'll raid farms. Either way, this ends badly for everyone." The room erupted in competing voices. Maria's faction argued for protecting Arjun at any cost. Thomas's group demanded practical solutions. Jake's hunting clients wanted assurances their safety wouldn't be compromised. Dave stepped forward, and the room quieted slightly. What if we relocate both tigers to the National Sanctuary-controlled environment? Guaranteed food, no risk to livestock. Marcus stared at his son, betrayed. That's sensible, Thomas said, nodding. The cub's face is destroyed anyway. Neither of them can survive out here. Maria shook her head. You're talking about caging wild animals because we can't coexist peacefully. We're talking about reality, Jake said. A disabled predator is dangerous to itself and to us. Marcus felt the weight of 40 eyes pressing on him. These were his neighbors, people he'd known for decades. They were scared, and their fear was legitimate. But caging Arjun? If Arjun cannot hunt after recovery, Marcus heard himself say, I will personally ensure he goes to a sanctuary. You have my word. The room relaxed slightly. Thomas nodded acceptance. Maria looked disappointed but resigned. Only Dave understood what the promise had cost. On the drive back, he asked quietly, Did you mean that? Marcus stared at the road. I don't know. I just needed them to stop. You always taught me that wild belongs wild. Was that a lie? Marcus had no answer. The recovery period brought small miracles and harsh realities. Kiran opened his eyes on day 4, saw his father through the bars, and made a sound not quite a growl, more like a question. Arjun rumbled back, low and reassuring. By day 5, Kiran attempted to stand. He fell, tried again, fell again. Marcus watched the monitor, remembering Helen's first attempts to walk after surgery. The same determination despite repeated failure. Day 6 brought Kiran's first drink of water, lapped awkwardly from a bowl with his damaged jaw. Day 7, Sarah carefully administered nutrients through the feeding tube while the cub watched her with wary eyes. Day 8 was breakthrough. Kiran chewed soft meat. The process was messy, inefficient, but functional. His modified jaw could still process food. Day 9. Kiran stood for 30 seconds without falling. Day 10. He took 3 steps toward his father's cage. Arjun's recovery was harder. He refused food for 3 days, lying motionless except for the paw stretched toward Kiran. Sarah had to force a feeding tube, and even weakened. Arjun's resistance was formidable. On day 4, Marcus did something protocol absolutely forbade. He entered the observation room and sat where Arjun could see him clearly. She lost part of herself too, Marcus said quietly, knowing the tiger couldn't understand words but hoping tone might penetrate. Cancer took her breast, her hair, her strength, but not her spirit. She fought until the very end because she wanted every hour she could get with the people she loved. He paused, watching Arjun's amber eyes. The question isn't whether you're whole. It's whether you still want to live. Day 5. Arjun ate voluntarily. Just a small amount, but it was progress. Day 6 brought the first attempt to stand. Arjun positioned his remaining front leg, tried to push up, and crashed down. The stump where his foreleg had been couldn't provide balance. Marcus watched, aching. Days 7 through 9 brought repeated attempts, repeated failures. Each crash seemed to drain more of Arjun's will. Then day 10 arrived. Arjun positioned himself differently, using his hindquarters for primary support, the single front leg for minimal balance. He pushed up, wobbled, held. 10 seconds on 3 legs before exhaustion forced him down. But those 10 seconds changed everything. Dave spent those same days investigating. The trap fragments told a story, serial numbers traced to a batch sold 2 years prior to hunting supply stores across 3 districts. He cross-referenced purchase records, finding dozens of potential buyers. One name appeared multiple times: Jake Patterson. Dave confronted him at the hunting supply store. Jake's denial came too quickly, too defensively. You're accusing me of poaching based on what that I bought legal equipment 2 years ago. Legal equipment that's illegal to use the way someone used it. Someone, not me. But Dave found witnesses. 3 villagers had seen Jake near the forest 3 weeks ago, carrying steel equipment. His alibi-checking legal hunting stands fell apart when Dave verified that hunting season didn't begin until December. Dave brought the evidence to his father. "I found who set the trap. It was Jake." Marcus looked up from the recovery monitors. "Can you prove it in court?" "Not beyond reasonable doubt, but enough to know." "What do you want to do?" "Expose him, press charges, make him pay, and turn the village into a war zone. Half of them will defend him, say we're persecuting local people to protect animals." Dave sat down heavily. "So what? We just let him get away with it?" "I don't know," Marcus admitted. 10 years ago, I would have said justice matters most. Now, he gestured toward the monitor showing Arjun and Kiran. "Now I think survival matters more." They sat in silence, watching 2 tigers fight for their lives, while the man who'd nearly ended those lives walked free. Day 14 brought the moment Marcus had been dreading. Sarah conducted her final medical assessment, reviewing blood work, X-rays, and behavioral observations. Both tigers were medically stable. The question now transcended medicine and entered the realm of survival. "Kenny Hunt?" Patricia Hammond asked bluntly. The regional director had arrived that morning, a 58-year-old career bureaucrat whose silver hair and pressed uniform spoke of someone who valued order above all else. She'd spent 2 hours reviewing files, medical records, and incident reports before rendering her preliminary judgment. "We need to know definitively," Patricia continued. "A 3-legged tiger cannot survive in the wild. The data is unambiguous." Marcus stood in the observation room, watching Arjun pace his cage with an uneven, rolling gait. "We need to test him." "How exactly do you propose we test a disabled apex predator?" Patricia's skepticism was palpable. "The 3-acre enclosure," Sarah suggested. "We release a live goat, controlled environment, but realistic enough to assess capability." Dave shook his head. "That's cruel. To both animals. And caging him for life isn't..." Marcus shot back. By afternoon, word had spread through the village. The white tiger would hunt, or he would be condemned. Spectators gathered outside the sanctuary fence, Thomas Whitfield with his faction of concerned farmers, Maria Santos with her environmental advocates, and Jake Patterson, whose nervous energy suggested more than casual interest. The 3-acre enclosure had been used for rehabilitation exercises, a fenced wilderness area with natural terrain. Rangers released a domestic goat through the side gate while Arjun and Kiran watched from the transport cage. The cub would remain secured. This test was for the father alone. Marcus opened Arjun's cage door remotely. The white tiger emerged slowly, testing his balance on the unfamiliar ground. His head swiveled, assessing threats, exits, and finally settling on the goat grazing 50 meters away. The crowd outside the fence fell silent. Arjun began his stalk. His approach was immediately wrong. The 3-legged gait created rhythmic sounds that any prey animal would detect. The missing foreleg threw off his center of balance, making the fluid grace of a normal tiger hunt impossible. When he was 20 meters from the goat, it looked up, ears forward. Arjun lunged. His powerful hindquarters propelled him forward, but without the balancing foreleg, his trajectory was off. He crashed into the ground 3 meters short of the goat, which bolted away in panic. Arjun scrambled to rise, but by the time he regained his feet, the prey had disappeared into brush on the far side of the enclosure. The crowd outside murmured. Dave looked away. Patricia made a note on her tablet. Marcus clenched his fists, willing Arjun to succeed where biology said he should fail. Arjun stood motionless for several minutes, sides heaving. Then he moved again, but not in pursuit. He circled the enclosure slowly, studying the terrain. The goat had emerged from cover and resumed grazing near a small creek that ran through the enclosure's lower section. 20 minutes passed. The crowd grew restless. "How long are we going to watch this?" Patricia asked. "As long as it takes," Marcus replied. Arjun had positioned himself uphill from the water source, partially concealed behind a fallen log. He'd chosen terrain that would let gravity work with him instead of against him. His body was completely still, only his eyes tracking the goat's movements. The goat approached the creek, lowered its head to drink. Arjun sprang. This time, the downhill momentum compensated for his missing leg. His trajectory was clean, economical. The goat tried to flee, but Arjun's jaws closed on its neck before it could take 3 steps. The kill was quick, professional, merciful. Silence. Then Maria began clapping. A few others joined her. Thomas Whitfield nodded slowly, grudging respect in his eyes. Patricia remained expressionless. 1 kill, under controlled conditions, against domestic prey. But Marcus had seen something else. After releasing the goat, Arjun didn't feed. He stood over his kill, panting heavily, his remaining front leg trembling with exhaustion. A hunt that should have been routine had pushed him to his limit. That evening, Patricia called a meeting in the ranger station office. Marcus, Dave, and Sarah assembled around the scarred wooden table where Marcus had made countless difficult decisions over 3 decades. "I've reviewed the test results," Patricia began. "My recommendation stands: both tigers should be transferred to the National Zoo Sanctuary." "He succeeded," Marcus protested. "You saw it." "I saw a disabled predator barely manage to kill domestic prey in a controlled environment. That's not survival. Ranger Webb, that's a demonstration of why he cannot survive." Patricia opened her tablet, displaying graphs and statistics. 90% of disabled predators die within their first year of release. Starvation, injury from failed hunts, or death from competing predators who target the weak, the data is unambiguous. And 100% of caged wild tigers die inside, Marcus countered. Maybe not physically, but everything that makes them tigers. "Sentiment doesn't override biology," Dave spoke up, surprising everyone. "What if we give him a real test, the 100-acre wilderness buffer zone, GPS monitoring? If Arjun successfully hunts 3 times in 1 week, they go free." Patricia considered. "And if he fails? Then we accept your decision. No appeals. You're betting on a 3-legged tiger against documented failure rates?" "Yes," Dave said simply. "We are." Patricia studied the younger Morrison, perhaps seeing something of his father's stubbornness. "Fine. 72 hours from tomorrow morning. Transport will arrive. If your tiger proves he can survive by then, I'll authorize his release. If not, both go to captivity." After Patricia left, Sarah pulled Marcus aside. Her expression was grave. "There's something I need to tell you. Arjun's post-operative scans show early arthritis in his remaining front leg. The compensatory strain is accelerating joint deterioration." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "How long?" 18 months, maybe 2 years before that leg fails completely. Even if he passes this test, he's on borrowed time." "Does Patricia know?" "Not yet. But I'm legally required to disclose medical conditions that affect wildlife management decisions." "Don't." Marcus held her gaze. "Give him these 2 years. He's earned that much." "Marcus, that's withholding critical information. It's giving him the time he fought 4 days through hell to win." Sarah studied his face, seeing the desperation there. Finally, she nodded. 2 years? Then nature decides. That night, Marcus sat outside Arjun's cage, speaking to the tiger in the darkness. "Tomorrow, you get your chance. But you have to understand you need to succeed, not just for you. For every wild thing humans have ever hurt and tried to cage because we thought we knew better." Arjun's amber eyes reflected the security lights, unblinking. Across the sanctuary, Dave called his fiancée, Rebecca Torres, an elementary school teacher in the nearby town, listened as he explained everything. "You're risking your career for a tiger?" she asked. "I'm honoring my mother. She always said Dad cared more about his work than us, but I finally understand he doesn't care more. He just cares deeper than most people can. And I want to be that kind of man. Sarah loaded emergency medical equipment into the field truck tranquilizer guns, antibiotics, surgical supplies. She told her assistant, "If anything goes wrong out there, we'll have minutes, not hours." She checked Kieran's vitals one final time. The cub was strong enough to accompany his father, but without protection, vulnerable to any number of threats. By midnight, the village had gathered. Maria brought supporters carrying "Save Arjun" signs. Thomas brought farmers who wanted guarantees of safety. Jake Patterson stood at the back, chain-smoking, his hands shaking slightly. The tension was a physical presence, thick and suffocating. Marcus, Dave, and Sarah stood together in the pre-dawn darkness, watching the first hints of gray touch the eastern sky. "Whatever happens," Dave said quietly, "I'm proud we tried." Marcus turned to his son, and for the first time in years, truly looked at him. "Your mother, at the end, told me she was proud I never stopped fighting for what I believed in, even when it cost us time together. Did she forgive you?" "She said there was nothing to forgive. That loving something deeply was never a sin." Sarah checked her watch. "Sunrise in 10 minutes. Marcus took a deep breath. "Then let's give them their freedom." Dawn broke over the buffer zone with a pale, hesitant light that filtered through the mangrove canopy. Marcus stood at the transport cage, his hand on the release mechanism. Inside, Arjun and Kiran pressed against the bars, amber eyes fixed on the wilderness ahead. The crowd had swelled to over 50 villagers. Standing behind safety barriers Dave had erected the previous night, Patricia Hammond positioned herself near the GPS monitoring station, tablet ready. Sarah stood by the medical truck, emergency equipment within arm's reach. Marcus pulled the lever. The cage door swung open with a metallic groan. Kieran stepped out first, his movements tentative but curious. The young tiger's deformed jaw gave his face an asymmetrical appearance that would mark him for life, but his eyes were bright, alert. Arjun emerged more slowly, testing his three-legged stance on natural ground for the first time since the amputation. His white coat gleamed in the early light, the stump of his missing foreleg a harsh reminder of what the journey had cost him. Father and son stood at the threshold between captivity and freedom. Arjun turned back toward Kiran, making a low rumbling sound. The cub moved closer, pressing against his father's side. Then, together, they walked into the forest. The GPS monitors blinked to life, 2 signals moving deeper into the buffer zone, away from human observation. "Both active and transmitting clearly," Patricia announced. "The 72-hour evaluation period begins now." The first hour brought cautious optimism. Arjun and Kiran moved systematically through their new territory, pausing frequently at scent markers left by other animals. They found the creek that ran through the zone's center and drank deeply. Arjun marked several trees, claiming the space. Dave's drone camera captured footage of Kiran attempting to climb a fallen log, his playful energy undimmed by his injury. Arjun watched patiently, then helped the cub down when he became stuck. "Normal exploratory behavior," Sarah observed. "Good signs." But Marcus noticed something others missed. Arjun was limping more heavily than in the enclosure. The uneven terrain of the wild roots, rocks, slopes was far more challenging than the controlled environments where he'd recovered. Hour 4 brought the first test. The drone spotted a wild boar rooting through underbrush in a small clearing. Arjun immediately shifted into hunting mode. He positioned Kiran in dense brush, ensuring the cub's safety, then began his stalk. The approach was methodical. Arjun used available cover, moved downwind, kept his body low. But the 3-legged gait created rhythm patterns that no amount of patience could disguise. The boar's head lifted, ears rotating. Arjun charged. His hindquarters generated explosive power, but his balance was catastrophically wrong. The missing foreleg meant he couldn't adjust his trajectory mid-leap. He crashed into a tree trunk 3 meters from the boar, which bolted away with panicked squeals. The crowd outside the monitoring station murmured. Maria's supporters looked stricken. Thomas shook his head slowly. Arjun rose from the ground, shook himself, and returned to Kiran. The cub emerged from hiding, confused by the commotion. Father and son moved on. Hour 8 brought a second attempt. A small herd of deer grazed near the creek. Arjun's approach was more cautious this time, taking 20 minutes to position himself downwind. But when he was still 15 meters away, the deer spotted him. His three-legged gait was too obvious, too distinctive. The deer that would normally have tolerated a closer approach scattered while he was still well outside striking range. Arjun didn't even attempt pursuit. He understood his limitations. 2 failures, Patricia noted clinically. Prey animals are already learning to identify his disability. By hour 12, the sun was setting. Neither tiger had eaten. Kiran's hunger was evident in his plaintive mewing. Arjun tried to hunt smaller prey, a rabbit that zigzagged through brush in patterns the tiger's compromised mobility couldn't match. The rabbit escaped. Arjun stood in the fading light, sides heaving, his remaining front leg visibly trembling. "He's exhausted," Sarah said quietly. "Normal hunting shouldn't tire him like this." Patricia's assessment was brutal. Day 10 successful hunts. At this rate, the outcome is predetermined. Marcus said nothing. He watched the monitors as Arjun led Kiran to a sheltered area beneath an overhang, where both tigers settled for the night. Hungry. Unsuccessful. Struggling. Day 2 began with hope that quickly curdled into horror. Dawn found both tigers lethargic. Arjun's remaining front leg had swollen noticeably overnight, the arthritis Sarah had warned about, accelerated by compensatory strain. His limp was pronounced as he and Kiran left their shelter. "He's in pain," Sarah told Marcus. "Significant pain." "Can we intervene? Give him anti-inflammatories?" Patricia's voice cut through. "Absolutely not. This is a wild survival test. No human assistance of any kind." That was the agreement. Sarah's hands clenched into fists, but she remained silent. Midday brought desperation. Arjun hadn't eaten in over 30 hours. His body was burning through reserves it couldn't afford to lose. When the drone spotted a young water buffalo separated from its herd, Arjun made a decision that Marcus immediately recognized as dangerous. Water buffalo were formidable prey, massive, aggressive, equipped with horns that could gore a tiger to death. Healthy tigers hunted them in pairs or targeted only the very young or very old. Arjun was neither healthy nor paired, and this buffalo was adolescent, strong. "Don't," Marcus whispered at the monitor. "Don't do it." But Arjun had no choice. His cub was starving. The stalk took 40 minutes. Arjun approached from the blind side, using every scrap of available cover. The buffalo grazed, unaware. Arjun positioned himself for a leap that would require perfect execution. He sprang. For a heartbeat, it seemed possible. Arjun's jaws were aimed at the buffalo's throat, his weight calculated to bring the prey down, but the missing foreleg meant his landing angle was wrong by crucial degrees, instead of his jaws closing on the throat. Arjun's chest struck the buffalo's shoulder. The impact knocked both animals sideways. The buffalo recovered first, its survival instinct triggering immediate aggression. It gored Arjun in the remaining front shoulder. The horn penetrated deep, a puncture wound that bled immediately. Arjun roared not in aggression but in pain and retreated. The buffalo, terrified and angry, chased him for 20 meters before returning to its herd. The drone footage showed everything in terrible clarity. Arjun collapsed in thick brush, blood streaming from the shoulder wound. Kiran approached his father, making distressed sounds, trying to lick the injury. The blood trail was visible from the aerial camera, dark red against green vegetation. Too much blood. The crowd outside the monitoring station erupted. Maria was shouting at Patricia. Thomas looked genuinely disturbed. Jake Patterson had gone pale. Sarah grabbed her medical bag. "That's a puncture wound near the shoulder joint. If it gets infected..." "We observe only," Patricia said firmly. "Those were the terms. He's dying." Marcus's voice cracked. "Then he's failed the test, which proves exactly what the data predicted: he cannot survive in the wild." Patricia's tone was not cruel, merely factual. The transport will arrive tomorrow as scheduled. Maria pushed through the crowd. You're letting him die to prove a point. Thomas, conflicted, spoke up. This isn't right. Even I can see this isn't right. He's trying. That should count for something. But Patricia was unmoved. Trying doesn't overcome biology. I'm sorry. But the decision is made. Night fell with Arjun motionless in the brush. Thermal cameras showed his heat signature growing dimmer as blood loss and shock took their toll. Kiran huddled against his father's body, the cub's distress calls echoing through the monitoring station's speakers. The tigers hadn't eaten in over 36 hours. Arjun was bleeding from a wound that could easily prove fatal. The 72-hour test period had barely reached its midpoint, and already failure seemed inevitable. At 3 a.m, Marcus stood in the monitoring station, unable to sleep, watching the thermal image of a dying tiger and his frightened cub. Arjun's breathing was shallow, irregular. His body temperature was dropping. Dave entered quietly, brought his father coffee. They stood together in silence. Dad, Dave finally said, we have to do something. If we intervene, Patricia wins. She'll say he can't survive without us. But if we don't, he dies. And she wins anyway. Marcus stared at the screen. Arjun's breathing had become barely perceptible. Kiran was crying high-pitched distress calls that any parent, human or animal, would recognize as a child begging for help. Marcus stood abruptly. I'm going in. Patricia stepped between him and the door. You do that. This test is over. The transport arrives in the morning, and both tigers go to captivity. Then it's over. I won't watch him die for bureaucracy. Dave stepped forward. Dad, wait. But before anyone could move, an alarm sounded from the GPS monitoring station. A new heat signature had appeared on the thermal imaging, entering the buffer zone from the north. Sarah checked the GPS database, her eyes widening. It's another tiger, large female, transmitter ID matches. She looked up, stunned. It's Nalini, Arjun's mate. She's breached the perimeter. Everyone crowded around the monitors as the thermal camera tracked the approaching tigress. She was moving with purpose, directly toward where Arjun and Kiran lay hidden. The expected outcome was violence, territorial aggression, competition, predatory opportunism targeting the weak. What happened instead would change everything they thought they knew about tigers. Nalini approached through the pre-dawn darkness with the fluid grace of an uninjured predator. The thermal camera tracked her every movement as she entered the clearing where Arjun lay bleeding. The monitoring station held its collective breath. The tigress paused 10 meters away, her body language readable even through the grainy thermal imaging. Her head lowered, scenting the air. She would smell blood, weakness, vulnerability, everything that should trigger either aggression or abandonment. Instead, she approached slowly and nuzzled Arjun's head. My God, Sarah whispered. She's not attacking him. Nalini circled Arjun's prone form, inspecting the wound with careful attention. Then she began licking the injury, long, methodical strokes that cleaned away blood and debris. Arjun didn't resist, didn't growl. He lay still, accepting her care. Kiran emerged from where he'd been hiding and approached his mother cautiously. Nalini paused her ministrations long enough to nuzzle the cub, checking his condition. Satisfied he was uninjured, she returned to Arjun's wound. Tigers don't do this, Thomas said from the observation area. They're solitary. They don't nurse injured mates. Not typically, Sarah agreed, her voice filled with wonder. But tigresses have been documented caring for wounded mates in rare circumstances, usually only during mating season, and only for short periods. This is extraordinary. After 20 minutes of cleaning the wound, Nalini stood and looked directly at the nearest camera. For a moment, it seemed as though she knew she was being watched, assessed, judged. Then she turned and disappeared into the forest. She's abandoning them, Patricia said, returning to her territory. But Marcus shook his head. No, she's hunting. 90 minutes later, Nalini returned dragging a freshly killed deer, a young doe, throat torn, still warm. She dragged it directly to Arjun and Kiran, then stepped back, allowing them to feed. Arjun rose with visible effort, his shoulder wound still seeping blood. But hunger overrode pain. He fed, his powerful jaws tearing into the carcass. Kiran approached next, his damaged jaw making the process awkward, but he managed to consume strips of meat. While father and son fed, Nalini stood guard, her head swiveled constantly, ears rotating, watching for threats. She was protecting them, providing for them, compensating for Arjun's disability with her own strength. The monitoring station erupted in chaos. Maria's supporters were cheering. Thomas stood slack-jawed. Even Patricia remained silent, staring at the screens. Dave found his voice first. She's been tracking them this whole time. She knew exactly where they were. She knew Arjun was hurt. She's not abandoning him, Marcus said, emotion thick in his throat. She's partnering with him. She's giving him what we couldn't support. Sarah was already analyzing the implications. If she continues this behavior, if she hunts for the family unit while Arjun recovers, it changes everything, Marcus finished. Patricia finally spoke, her professional demeanor cracking slightly. This is unprecedented. In 25 years of wildlife management, I've never seen cooperative behavior like this between adult tigers outside of brief mating periods. Because you've never seen a family with no other choice, Marcus said. They're adapting, surviving, together. Nalini remained with Arjun and Kiran through the rest of the night. The thermal cameras showed all three tigers huddled together in the sheltered area, Nalini positioned protectively between her injured mate and the open forest. As dawn broke on day 3, the village gathering had taken on a different character. The anticipated failure had become something else entirely, a story of resilience, adaptation, and family bonds that transcended species expectations. Jake Patterson stood at the back of the crowd, his hands shaking as he lit another cigarette. He'd been drinking. Marcus could smell it from 20 feet away. The man's guilt had been building for 3 days, watching the consequences of his actions play out in real time. When Nalini left at dawn to hunt again, Jake suddenly broke. "This is my fault," he shouted, stumbling forward. "All of it is my fault." The crowd turned, startled. Maria stepped toward him. "What are you talking about?" The trap that hurt the cub." Jake's words tumbled out in a rush of alcohol-fueled confession. "I said it. I set all of them. I've been setting traps for 2 years. The gathering went silent, tension crackling like static electricity. "I needed money," Jake continued, tears streaming down his weathered face. "My farm was failing. My wife left. I had debts. The traffickers. They pay $5,000 per tiger. I just had to set the traps. Tell them the locations." Thomas Whitfield's face darkened with rage. "You brought poachers here. You endangered the entire village. The traps weren't supposed to catch cubs. They were supposed to catch adults for the black market." Jake was sobbing now, but that little one stepped in it, and I couldn't get him out without being caught, so I left him there. I left him to die. Maria moved with surprising speed, getting in Jake's face. "You sold our heritage, our protectors, for money. How many?" Marcus's voice cut through the chaos, cold and controlled. "How many traps are still out there?" Jake swallowed hard. 12, maybe 15. I don't remember exactly. "You don't remember how many death traps you planted in our forest?" Dave's voice shook with fury. "I'm sorry," Jake whispered. "I'm so sorry. Watching that tiger walk 4 days to save his son. Seeing what I did to them. I can't live with it anymore." Patricia immediately radioed law enforcement. Within 30 minutes, 2 police vehicles arrived. Jake was arrested on site, handcuffed in front of the crowd that had once considered him a community member. As officers read him his rights, the charges were staggering illegal trapping, wildlife trafficking conspiracy, attempted poaching, endangering protected species. He faced 10 to 15 years in federal prison. But more important than legal consequences was what Jake's confession triggered in the community. Thomas Whitfield, The farmer who'd led opposition to tiger protection just days earlier stepped to the front of the gathering. His voice was rough with emotion. "We've been blaming the wrong predator," he said. "Tigers aren't the threat. Human greed is the threat. Jake's greed. And our complicity because we all knew wildlife crime was happening, and we all looked the other way because it didn't touch us directly." He turned to Marcus. "I propose we form a trap removal team. Every farmer, every hunter, every able-bodied person in this village. We sweep the forest systematically. We find every trap Jake set and every trap anyone else might have set. We make this forest safe again." Maria stepped forward. "And we create a compensation fund for farmers who lose livestock to predators. Real compensation, not just empty promises. So nobody else turns to Jake's solution." The proposal passed with overwhelming approval. Within hours, the village had mobilized. Over the next 2 days, 40 villagers entered the buffer zone under ranger supervision. They worked in teams, marking and removing traps with systematic precision. Dave coordinated from the monitoring station, creating maps of trap locations and establishing new patrol routes. They found 13 traps. Jake's count had been accurate. One contained a young leopard still alive, terrified but uninjured. Sarah's team tranquilized and released it after a medical check. 2 traps contained the remains of deer, which the villagers buried with unexpected reverence. Rebecca Torres arrived with her elementary school class, 20 children who'd been learning about the white tiger's journey. They created welcome home signs for Arjun and Kiran, transforming the narrative from dangerous predator to injured neighbor. The shift in community consciousness was palpable. Tigers moved from threat to victim, from enemy to symbol of what humans could destroy or protect. Patricia Hammond observed the transformation with visible surprise. She pulled Marcus aside on the afternoon of day 3. "In 25 years of wildlife management, I've never seen a community rally like this," she admitted. "Usually it's us against them conservationists fighting locals for every inch of protection." Because for the first time, they see tigers not as abstract wildlife, but as individuals, Marcus replied. "Arjun has a story now, a name, a family. He's not a tiger. He's the father who walked through hell to save his son." "You're a clever man, Webb. I didn't plan this. Arjun did. He reminded everyone what's worth fighting for." While the village transformed, Sarah made a critical medical discovery. Analyzing samples she'd covertly collected from the brush where Nalini had licked Arjun's wound, she found something remarkable. Nalini's saliva contains unusually high concentrations of natural antimicrobial enzymes, she explained to Marcus and Dave. "It's actually preventing infection better than some antibiotics we might have administered." The thermal imaging confirmed what this meant. Arjun's wound was healing. Not quickly, but steadily. The bleeding had stopped. His body temperature was normalizing. Nalini's instinctive care had provided exactly what medical intervention couldn't constant. Gentle wound cleaning that promoted natural healing. By the afternoon of day 4, Arjun was mobile again, still favoring the injured shoulder, still limping heavily on his arthritic front leg, but standing, walking, living. The GPS monitors tracked all 3 tigers moving through their territory together. Arjun, Nalini, and Kiran, a family unit that shouldn't exist according to established tiger behavior patterns, but did exist because survival demanded adaptation. Day 4, evening, brought the moment that would determine everything. The drone spotted a large wild boar rooting through underbrush near the creek. Arjun immediately shifted into hunting mode, but so did Nalini. Marcus watched the monitors intently as the 2 adult tigers began what appeared to be coordinated movement. "They're positioning themselves," Dave said, leaning closer to the screen. "Look, Nalini's circling wide. Arjun's moving to the bottleneck near the fallen trees." "Tigers don't hunt cooperatively," Patricia said, but her voice lacked conviction. "They're solitary predators." "These tigers aren't," Marcus replied, "because they have to be something different to survive." Nalini began the drive, her presence pushing the boar away from open ground. The pig panicked, running toward what appeared to be escape terrain but was actually the bottleneck where Arjun waited, conserving his energy, calculating angles. The boar charged directly toward Arjun's position. Kiran watched from safe brush, Learning. If this works, Patricia breathed, then you'll have documentation of behavioral adaptation never recorded in wild tigers. Marcus finished. Arjun's muscles tensed. The boar was 30 meters away. 20, 15. Everything hung on this moment. Freedom or captivity, wild or caged. Trust in nature's ability to adapt, or humanity's certainty that it knew better. The hunt was about to begin. The boar charged through the bottleneck, its hooves pounding against packed earth. Nalini drove from behind, her presence creating panic that overrode the pig's natural caution. Arjun waited, his white body nearly invisible against the sun-bleached fallen log. 10 meters. 5. Arjun sprang. His hindquarters generated explosive power, compensating for the missing foreleg. But the crucial difference was positioning. He'd chosen terrain where gravity worked with him, where the downward slope added momentum to his leap. His jaws closed on the boar's throat with practiced precision. The prey tried to flee, but Nalini arrived from the opposite direction, cutting off escape. Between the two tigers, the boar had no chance. The kill was clean, efficient, coordinated. The monitoring station erupted. Children screamed in joy. Maria openly wept. Thomas Whitfield clapped slowly, respect evident in every measured beat. Patricia Hammond stood motionless, staring at the screens. Finally, she turned to Marcus. "Ranger Webb, come here." Marcus approached, expecting resistance, preparing for fight. Patricia extended her hand. "You win. They go free." Marcus was stunned. "Just like that. You showed me evolution in real time, a disabled predator adapting through cooperation, a family unit forming where solitary instinct should dominate. This is—" She paused, searching for words. "This is unprecedented." Patricia pulled out her tablet, making official notes. "I'm recommending the buffer zone become permanent protected territory. Arjun, Nalini, and Kiran will be monitored remotely but not interfered with. This becomes a research site documenting adaptive behavior in compromised predators." "They won't be taken." Marcus could barely believe what he was hearing. "No. They'll be studied, protected, and most importantly, left wild." Patricia's professional mask slipped slightly, revealing genuine emotion beneath. "You've proven that wildlife doesn't always need our rescue. Sometimes it just needs our respect and space to find its own solutions." 3 weeks later, on a cool December morning, the final chapter of captivity ended. Sarah had declared both tigers healthy enough for complete freedom. The GPS collars, those last tethers to human monitoring, would be removed. Arjun and his family would disappear into the Sundarbans wilderness, tracked only by occasional camera traps. The procedure required luring the tigers into a clearing with fresh meat. Marcus personally removed Arjun's collar, his hands steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. As the device came free, Arjun's amber eyes met Marcus's for a long moment. There was no aggression, no fear, just acknowledgement between two beings who had shared suffering and emerged, changed. Marcus stepped back. Arjun turned toward the forest, Kiran bouncing ahead with adolescent energy restored. Nalini followed, her powerful form moving with fluid grace. But Arjun paused at the tree line. He looked back at Marcus, Dave, and Sarah standing together. He made a low rumble, not threatening, not aggressive. Communication. Then he disappeared into the mangrove shadows. Dave put his hand on his father's shoulder. "You did it, Dad." "We did it," Marcus corrected. "You, me, Sarah, the village. Even Patricia, and mostly, Arjun did it himself. We just gave him the chance." "Will we see them again?" Marcus smiled sadly. "Maybe, if they want us to." 2 months later, on a late January afternoon, Marcus sat in the ranger station reviewing camera trap footage. His coffee had gone cold, forgotten, as he cycled through images of wildlife moving through protected corridors. Then motion sensors triggered at the buffer zone perimeter. Marcus checked the cameras, and his breath caught. Arjun stood at the viewing area, the safe observation point where humans could watch wildlife without intrusion. But he wasn't alone. Nalini stood beside him, and Kiran, now nearly adult-sized, his deformed jaw barely noticeable in his magnificent adolescent form. And there were 3 more cubs tiny, maybe 2 months old, tumbling over each other with the clumsy enthusiasm of newborns. "He's introducing us," Marcus whispered, "to the new generation." Sarah, present for monthly supply delivery, leaned closer to the monitor. "I've never seen this behavior documented. Tigers don't present their young to humans. This family has never done anything typical." Marcus made a decision that would have horrified him months ago. He stepped outside risky, potentially dangerous, but compelled by something deeper than protocol. He stood 20 meters from the tiger family, making no aggressive moves, simply present. Arjun watched him calmly. Then, in a gesture that seemed impossible, the great white tiger lowered his head slightly in acknowledgement, perhaps even a bow. Marcus returned the gesture, a small nod of respect between 2 fathers who understood sacrifice. Arjun rose, turned, and led his family back into the forest. But young Kiran lingered, sitting on his haunches for 30 seconds, watching the human who had saved his life. Then he bounded after his family, disappearing into green shadows. Dave had been filming the entire encounter from the doorway. "Dad, that was gratitude. That was actual gratitude from a wild animal." Marcus wiped his eyes. "No. That was a father showing his children that not all humans are enemies, that some bridges are worth maintaining." 6 months later, the Regional Wildlife Conference drew specialists from across the country. Dave Morrison, now lead researcher on the Sundarbans Adaptive Tiger Project, presented findings that would reshape wildlife management philosophy. "Cooperative hunting strategies in disabled predators," he explained, showing footage of Arjun and Nalini's coordinated hunts. "Our data shows an 87% success rate as a family unit. 3 new cubs are thriving. Kiran is learning cooperative hunting behaviors, potentially passing this adaptation to future generations." Patricia Hammond, now an advocate for adaptive wildlife management, gave the keynote address. "We cannot predict how nature will solve problems. We can only provide space for solutions to emerge. Arjun's family proves that wildlife resilience exceeds our expectations when given opportunity." She cited the Sundarbans case study in international journals, sparking policy changes across 12 countries. Thomas Whitfield spoke at the conference's community panel. 8 months, 0 livestock losses to tigers. Because we patrol, remove traps, and respect territory boundaries, the tigers stay in the buffer zone. We stay in farmland. Mutual respect works. Maria Santos added, "Our school teaches Tiger Week now. Children learn that coexistence isn't just possible, it's necessary for all our survival." But Marcus, promoted to Regional Conservation Director, used his platform to establish 12 new buffer zones across the region. He trained rangers in non-intervention protocols, spreading a philosophy that contradicted decades of management dogma. Wildlife doesn't need rescue, it needs space. The 1-year anniversary brought the entire community together. Arjun Day became an official local holiday. Children performed plays about the white tiger's journey. Villagers shared stories of peaceful coexistence that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. Dr. Ramon Gutierrez returned from retirement to accept an honorary award. Rebecca Morrison, now Dave's wife and 3 months pregnant, coordinated the educational exhibits. Sarah received recognition for veterinary excellence in wildlife medicine. During the celebration, motion sensors triggered. The crowd tensed. Old fears died hard. Marcus checked the cameras and smiled. "Come see this." On the screens, the entire tiger family stood at the perimeter. Arjun, gray now touching his muzzle, arthritis visible but managed. Nalini, strong and protective. Kiran, magnificent in full adulthood. 5 cubs, the original 3+2 new additions. They simply stood there, watching, as if participating in the celebration honoring their survival. Children waved. The tigers didn't flee. Then, as sunset painted the sky orange and gold, they departed as silently as they'd arrived. That evening, Marcus and Dave stood on the station porch, watching darkness claim the forest. "Do you think Mom would have understood?" Dave asked. "All of this?" Marcus considered carefully. "Your mother understood love and sacrifice, and fighting for what matters, even when it's hard. She would have understood perfectly. I'm naming the baby Helen. If it's a girl," Marcus felt tears threaten, "she would have loved that. And if it's a boy, Arjun." Marcus laughed through his emotion. "A boy named Arjun Morrison. Your mother would have said, 'We've gone completely wild.'" "Maybe we have. But wild isn't wrong. Is it?" Marcus looked toward the dark forest where thermal cameras showed heat signatures of the tiger family, bedded down safely. "No, son, wild is free, and freedom is worth every sacrifice we made." The camera pulled back slowly, ranger station glowing warm against encroaching darkness. Beyond it, the vast Sundarbans wilderness, and within that wilderness, a family of white tigers sleeping peacefully. Text appeared over the final image. Arjun lived 3 more years before arthritis claimed him peacefully in his sleep at age 12. His legacy continues through 23 documented descendants, all exhibiting cooperative hunting behaviors. The Sundarbans buffer zone expanded to 500 acres, protecting 12 tiger families. 0 poaching incidents in 4 years. Marcus Webb retired in 2028, succeeded by his son David. The white tiger of Sundarbans became legend not for what he lost, but for what he taught us about resilience, family, and the unbreakable bond between fathers and sons, regardless of species. The screen faded to black over distant tiger calls, and the gentle sounds of the forest night, a wilderness made safer not through control, but through respect. I've told you Arjun's story, but the truth is, it changed me as much as it changed Marcus. See, I used to think strength meant never breaking, that good fathers never failed, never doubted, never needed help. I thought asking for support was weakness. Arjun walked 4 days on a shattered leg because he understood something. I'm still learning strength isn't about being whole. It's about refusing to give up on the ones you love, even when you're falling apart yourself. Marcus carried guilt for 8 years, believing his mistake had disqualified him from redemption. But Arjun showed him that the tiger he'd wounded still trusted him with the most precious thing in his world, his dying child. That's grace I don't fully comprehend. Gratitude that transcends species and memory. And Nalini taught us that family isn't about perfection. It's about showing up when everything's broken and saying, "I'll hunt for both of us until you're strong again." I think about them sometimes, when my own burdens feel too heavy. A 3-legged tiger who learned to hunt differently. A father who turned his deepest shame into his greatest act of love. Maybe we're all just trying to find our way home through the wilderness. And maybe, like Arjun, we don't have to make that journey alone.